D in Colorado as a theist. So welcome, D. You're on with Matt and Mandy. How are you?
Hi, D.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay. I am okay. I had a question. I am kind of on the verge of atheism. I keep falling a little bit back into theism, but I have a disorder called dissociative identity disorder. Do you know what that is?
Say that one more time.
But go ahead and explain it to us because I don't want to get it wrong, and it still could be educational for even anybody in the audience who doesn't know. So yes.
Okay, so dissociative identity disorder, just really short explanation. If you went through severe childhood trauma, your identity wasn't able to fully form into one solid state of consciousness. And so because of dissociation, you have more than one alter, is what they're called, basically an alternate state of consciousness. So they used to call it multiple personality disorder. It's not called that anymore, but it's that's what it is. And I am struggling because, and this is supported by science and has been confirmed by my therapist, I have a non-human alter. The alter is a pixie. It was created that way because of the fact that that's what I thought could cope with the trauma situation at the time. That's the way my brain handled it. However, I'm struggling because I'm trying to figure out the line between acknowledging that alter and not just shutting it down as not existing because it exists, and in order to fuse with this alter, I have to acknowledge it. And on the other side, I want to keep skepticism as I'm walking through this. This situation keeps pulling me closer back to theism because it's a supernatural thing that is the form of one of my identities, of my alternate forms of consciousness. So what would be your advice in walking the line between acknowledging that alter and also keeping my ground on reality, and that those things don't necessarily exist in real life?
Right. So thank you for calling in, D. And let me just applaud you for having a therapist and also having an understanding of what you've gone through. Because most people who have gone through abuse and trauma cannot recognize that. And so you're already on a really, really good path here. And I think it just needs to be what needs to be understood about atheism and non-belief is that there is no full hard stop except on basically the idea that there are no God, spirits, and supernatural beings. This is how I'm just explaining it here. But when it comes to, I think what religion tends to do is at times exacerbate what people are already going through, because when you were fully religious, did you happen to think that your alternate you thought that your alternate form was some sort of God? Is that what you're saying? That you might have thought, or you still think it might be?
At the time, I believed in the supernatural. I believed in things like pixies and fairies and things like that. And so because I believed it at that time, my brain formed a form of consciousness. Her name is Cora, and she believes she is a pixie. That is internal world. That is what she is. However, I know that that's not a proven by science, reliable thing outside of my own brain. That makes sense.
It does, and I think where I'm trying to get to, and Matt may have a different response to this, is that not believing, or your journey out of belief doesn't mean that you stop struggling or that you stop acknowledging this other part, right? We're not trying to say that you should stop trying to acknowledge it, but you at least know that this is something that is a result of some sort of trauma or abuse or some sort of mental, not defect, and I wouldn't consider it a deficiency, but something that you realize that has uh, sort of caused this sense of dissociation or something in your brain. And I think that that's
Okay.
something that you don't just have to say that you don't have to feel as if you should just get over overnight because it didn't start overnight.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
these are the things that
Yeah.
you continue to work through. And um, I think one of the problems or what you can take comfort in is that when you come out of religion, we're not just telling you that it's God and that there's something wrong with you and that you should just pray on it. This is probably something that you will need to continue to work through probably throughout the rest of your life.
Okay.
And as you continue on through therapy and through acknowledging what this is and acknowledging that there is a scientific or medical term for it, um, but still tend to, but you can acknowledge that this is something that you go through, then the process becomes easier or it can become easier.
Okay.
I have a couple thoughts,
Okay.
but I also have
Thank
questions.
you.
And I must admit, Dee, I'm absolutely fascinated.
Absolutely.
And what I'd love to do is
Yes.
I'd recommend you call back on a night when Shannon Q is here, because she has
Okay.
far greater understanding of psychiatry, psychology, brain stuff entirely. And so I'm not going to. I have no expertise here. I've studied just a little bit, and I'm completely armchairing it here. But I do want to say a couple things, and that's it almost doesn't matter how or why this occurred or who Cora identifies as. It doesn't matter. So you are at a point where you know that, hey, this is a mental disorder. And so my alter is, as the best of science can understand, my alter isn't real, but it doesn't change anything at all about how you feel and interact with Cora. And the same thing is true for Cora with respect to, it doesn't matter whether pixies are real or not. That's who Cora identifies as. And so,
Okay.
it's to me I am in agreement with Mandisa. You're already seeing a therapist, a counselor. That's the first step.
Yeah, I've been seeing a therapist for years, and we only just figured this out over the past 3 or 4 years. So,
yeah, it's one of those things where, like, I don't want to give too many details. I know someone. I interacted with someone who had similar issues, not identical, borderline personality disorder stuff, and some kind of alter, even if it wasn't a total dissociative identity disorder thing. And the one thing that struck me is that, well, let me ask you this. This is just me being curious, Dee. So if you could eliminate Cora and any other alters from your psyche entirely, would you want that?
So I have talked to my therapist about fusion, which is the only way to eliminate, and that's not even fully eliminating them from the psyche. It's just fusing all of the identity back into one form. Mm-hmm. And I would ideally like to do that at some point. I'm just not sure how to go about. I am a very big skeptic, and I'm starting to finally get out of theism, which had my life for so long. And so I'm trying to figure out how to interact with this alter that isn't human in her mind. And if I fuse with her, she becomes a part of that. And so now I'm wondering how that's going to affect me. I don't want to go from being skeptical to believing that pixies exist.
Yeah, I get that. I can imagine. So to sit here and go, okay, I know I want to get treatment, but right now the only treatment is for me to essentially, if I'm understanding it correctly, it's viewing it as if these are fractured portions of one psyche. And so the solution is to make Cora a functional part of your identity. That would be the fusion part, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so then instead of having an alter,
the 3 parts all together into one.
Right. So that instead of going from one to another, they exist in unity. And I understand why that would be absolutely terrifying, especially after so many, like, even if I liked my alters, that doesn't mean that I necessarily want them to be a part of me. So, yeah, I can completely see that.
You know, this reminds me of, Matt and Dee, I'm sorry. This reminds me of people who go to events like Dragon Con. You know, I guess, and I'm not trying to trivialize this here, but I actually would encourage you to embrace it more, because usually when stuff like this, and like Matt said, I'm sort of winging it, armchairing it here, but oftentimes we create, or sometimes these alternate IDs form out of trauma because we have been conditioned to not accept, these other ideas that we may have, or we have been taught that there's something shameful about them. And so being able to accept and embrace that you have this other identity, Cora, that sometimes, maybe perhaps, I hope there is another support system outside of therapy that allows you to embrace Cora in a way that is okay. Because there's probably even nothing wrong with that. I think the more it seems like there's something wrong, or the more you try to fight it, the worse it might become.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So I think that being able to engage or indulge or embrace that, even to a point where it's like, okay, it may even be fun to some extent, because the more you do it, the more you can normalize it. And it's like, okay, well, first of all, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with, with Cora either. So I think the more you're able to get into it, I think that could be a step in letting go of the struggle with it.
One of the things I appreciate the skepticism, absolutely, Dee, and because there's a number of different ways to look at it. You can look at it as like you're incomplete without your alters. You can look at it as, no, I'm better off if my alters are separate. That you could do any of these. And as a skeptic, to say I've got an alter that is kind of is a woo person that I wouldn't have wanted to hang out with. Why would I want that rolled in there? The other thing to recognize is that it depends on how these things are impacting your daily life. As to, and by the way, all I'm doing and all I will ever do is say, continue talking with your therapist. We're going to treat this stuff, but my brain can't stop being curious about this. And one of the things is, I don't know how much difficulty it's actually causing you to, and if there's any sort of rush, but I absolutely understand the kind of, I'm understanding skepticism more. And what about this? And how does this impact? And one thing I'll point out as a skeptic, that you need to realize, and it'll be so easy for you to realize, is this: you weren't always a skeptic, and you used to believe a lot of really weird things too. And yet you changed your mind, you developed a better understanding. And if you were to fuse, then perhaps it would be really easy for those alters.
And would be able to be skeptical.
Yeah. If you can be skeptical, you should have some optimism that the other parts of you might also have that as well.
Okay. Thank you, guys. This helped a lot.
Great.
Skepticism in conjunction with this disorder I have is a lot. And I appreciate you guys.
That is totally understandable. It's completely understandable. And this is something that requires support and people not judging, and people not just telling you that, oh my gosh, you just absolutely have to do this, that, and the third. This requires people objective listening as well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you guys so much. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
No
And thank you for
problem.
calling and being
I'll call
brave
back
and
when
sharing.
Shannon's there.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
But
I'm trying.
Good.
kudos to Dave for being brave and sharing. I don't have many secrets, and my life's pretty open. And a lot of people know shit about me that maybe nobody should know. But I don't think that if I had her mental disorder, I don't think I could talk about it. But I don't know. She's so. I appreciate the bravery and honesty.
I do too, and I can absolutely I applaud anyone because I am an advocate for people speaking up and talking about the things that they go through. I know I do that a lot as well, and it does take a lot of courage and a lot of bravery. I think one of the worst things people can do is keep that stuff to themselves and be silent because it doesn't just affect them; it affects the people around them too.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
yeah, the more we can get rid of or at least eliminate stigma and shame around opening up about the things that we go through, um, I think we can do a whole lot better.
Yep. I concur.